Righto, morning all. Guys, this video is about how to make a feeder for your stingless bees. Now, whether you need to feed your stingless bees or not is entirely up to you, okay? Entirely based on your individual circumstances, how many bees you have on your property, what's the resource availability like, etc., etc. So at the moment, I've just started feeding our bees here in Brisbane because there's reasonable amounts of pollen around, but very little nectar. And we have a lot of colonies here that are young rescues that are rebuilding and splits that are rebuilding, a few adductions around the place as well, and they all need resources. So that's why we're doing it. But I will say this, if you've got a small amount of hives, like say, I don't know, up to 10, the chances that you will ever need to feed your bees are pretty remote, really. But again, I don't judge anyone. I don't want to be judged either. So as the beekeeper, you are in the best position to determine your individual circumstances and whether you think you should or should not be feeding. But anyway, here we go. So it's really simple. Here we've got a little bucket. Okay, this is it's actually a paint bucket, available from Bunnings. They're about $6. Now, what I've done is drilled a heap of holes right around the circumference of the box, about 50 millimeters up from the bottom. Okay, don't go lower than about 50 mil. If you put your holes right down here, then honeybees can actually stick their proboscis down there and they'll steal all your food. But if it's up here, then they can't get to it and they just give up. So the size of the hole that I've drilled in here is 3.5 mil. Don't go bigger than that. And don't go smaller than that. You could probably get away with 3 mil, but anything smaller than 3 mil and the bees struggle to get in, but 3.5 is perfect. Okay, so I use a sponge in the bottom of the bucket here. So here is the brand of sponge that I use. Okay, again, available from Bunnings. They're a nice thin sponge. They're only about 10 mil thick. There it is there. So what I do is I get 4 of these sponges. There's 8 in a packet, so enough to make 2 feeders. Okay, so I sit them like that on my workbench. And I get my bucket and I sit it smack in the middle. Okay, so you have an equal distance from the edge of the bucket to all sides of the sponges. And then once your bucket's in position, push down hard on it and get a Stanley knife and just run around the outside edge of the bucket. And you'll then be left with 4 quarters for your sponges that will fit nicely inside your bucket. Okay, we'll just have a look inside this one here. As you can see, it's very popular. So there are my 4 quarters of sponges in there. Nice neat fit. And the bees are just foraging on top of those sponges. Nice and safe, so there's no chance of your bees drowning in it. There's no float that can tip over. Very safe. So you want to put enough food in the bottom of your bucket so that when you put your sponges in, it soaks it all up, and but you don't have pooling liquid sitting on top of your sponges. Okay, so what do you feed them? I'll just slide this lid back on. Okay, so I use an invert sugar syrup solution, and it is extremely effective. I've been using it for about the last 5 years. Now the recipe for this solution, if you get onto Facebook and you go to the Australian Native Bee Network page, click on the Files tab, scroll down and you will see a PDF that has a recipe by Bob Luttrell, and it's not too tricky to make, but it is extremely effective. I love it. It's great, and it's the only thing I've used. So the invert tends to be really stable. It doesn't ferment. It's got a good shelf life. If you can just use a straight sugar and water solution, but yeah, I don't bother. I just go the invert. It's seems to be working for me anyway. After about 2 days, you'll notice that as the bees have consumed a lot of that syrup that is in the sponges might start to get a little bit hard. So at that point, you want to pull them out and wash them in warm water and start again. Put fresh solution in the bottom of your bucket and put your sponges back in. That tends to work really well. If you let your sponges get rock hard, then they're useless. You've got to service them. It's not a set and forget sort of feeder. Yeah, so about every 2 days. But I love it. It works really well. Now, the best way to attract bees to your feeder, on this one here, I've brushed a little bit of melted propolis onto the outside of the feeder, but nothing attracts stingless bees like Kadaki resin. Okay, so what I've got here is an old hive, and I've sat my feeder on top of the hive, but the bees are here primarily for the Kadaki resin. Try and get this to focus on there. There we go. And the feeder is a nice little bonus. And once they've found your feeder, you've got them. Alrighty, so there you go. Cheap, easy, and safe. Okay guys, catch you later, eh?